A major issue for any tech leader is thinking I will deal with that later, especially when that procrastination stems from fear. I know that a lot of us fear the different issues that we see around us, and then we decide to wait. What we don't realize is that this waiting is a decision, and often the worst one. When we wait with people problems, things usually don't fix themselves. And that's how you, as a leader, end up dropping the ball, end up realizing that you've made a mistake and let it get too far. In this video, we're going to be talking about dealing the fear, facing what you're fearing and actually handling it like an adult, like a leader. I actually waited on this because I didn't want to be talking about fear too close to Halloween. So now we're talking about handling our fears, because this is something that I see all over the place and I cannot do it without feeling like I'm doing something just for the trend of it. By the way, if you're new here, hi, I'm Aviv Ben-Yosef. I'm a tech executive coach and consultant. I help people just like you create teams worth leading, because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. That's my fear. And let's start, first of all, with a few real and recent stories about how people let the fears end up ruining their careers, their organizations, and a lot of their lives. Not saying it's going to be the end of it, but if you take a few good years of your life and waste it due to fear, that's, for me, a huge loss. Let's start with the first story. This is about a VP of engineering who could not bring himself to admit that he was feeling bored in the startup. And because of that, he actually had an issue even admitting to anyone else, even in private, that given the remote work scenario he was in, he was spending half of his time just doing nothing, just playing video games. The team was doing good enough. He didn't need to be involved in things too much day to day. So he was there for the dailies, he was there for some of the meetings, but a lot of things, they just did those by themselves. And he, at the rest of the time, rather than do things like think about the roadmap, think where I want to go, coaching his people, just ended up going off and playing things on Steam or whatever. The problem with that is that he did it for so long that he ended up losing steam. He actually burned out from not working too hard, from not working at all almost. And this caused him to get this sense of disengagement and not being connected with the organization, to a point that eventually the team started deteriorating. But when he finally noticed it, it was way too late. It was way too hard for him to get back into what actual leadership looks like, that it ended up being just too little too late. The organization was going downhill and he had to find a different job. That's the first example of what happens when we don't face the fear, and when we sort of convince ourselves that it's going to be fine, it's going to pass, whatever, and it just ends up taking too long till eventually we reach the point of no return. Another example is, recently I was working with someone who had this nagging feeling that one of their key managers in the organization had something shift, like that person was no longer really committed, and the CTO I was working with had this fear that maybe this person that was very valuable and extremely talented would end up leaving. I was like, okay, go ahead, talk to them. What do you say about that? Let's just ask them what's going on. I noticed something, etc. His nagging fear was, if I open this up, I might be opening a Pandora's box. By talking about it, I just might make them feel like they need to move. Or by talking about it, I'm just going to make them come up to me with all sorts of demands to change things that I'm not going to do, and then they'll leave. And this was the self-talk that the CTO was having, but just between him and himself. This loop going on, and no matter what, he couldn't bring himself to talk about this till, guess what, a couple of months have passed and that manager really did come and say, hey, I'm out of here, I got a new job. And this is, again, what we get when we keep trying to avoid those conversations, and because what we fear is oftentimes worse than what's actually going to happen, or worst case, it's going to happen anyway. So why not at least do something about it? And the last example is an example that's not a singular case. It's something that I see regularly. When I work with CTOs, VPs of engineering, heads of engineering, whatever, and they have this fear that the CEO is not pleased, that something is missing, or that there's some fear with the CEO feeling like something is not clicking, etc. And they, the tech leaders, are afraid of speaking out and saying, hey, how am I doing? Hey, what do you think about what's happening? Hey, give me some feedback. Hey, I need some more guidance. Hey, I want to be there. They have this fear of putting these things on the table, and as adults saying, let's talk about this. I know that something's not correct and I want to work on it. They fear that by doing this, they are actually putting the spotlight on themselves and are just likely to make it even worse. Truth is, if the CEO has already got something nagging, you might as well speak about it. If the CEO has got nothing to worry about, most people aren't going to say, hey, why did he ask that? They're going to say, whoa, look at that person I've got here. So proactive, so attentive, trying to make sure everything's fine. That's what most people think. And therefore, you do not need to avoid speaking up about what you're noticing. Because when you don't do that, what I've seen are the leaders who stuck their head in the sand, avoiding these conversations till it got to a point again where the CEO has had it with something, sometimes justifiably, sometimes not. But either way, when we're not talking about things, we cannot solve them. And yes, this is not entirely on the CTOs. They also have the CEOs in the picture. It takes two to tango, but that doesn't absolve you. It doesn't give you an excuse to not do anything, because a lot of times you have enough ownership, enough agency in order to make things better. You just have to realize it and take it. You have to start doing things. Before getting to what you have to do, the main takeaway today, even before we're talking about what you can change, is to realize that people problems don't usually get solved by themselves. They don't just go away. They tend to fester. They tend to get worse. And therefore, when you're not addressing them, when you have this fear about something happening to you personally, with your boss, with people reporting to you, when you have these people fears, I'm not talking about tech issues, I'm talking about things that are organizational, and you don't speak up about them, you just might end up paying extra, because you'll have to solve it at the last chance, at the highest cost, with all the stress in the world, as opposed to being proactive, being a leader, stating what you're noticing, working on it before the issues happen. Sometimes you can ensure that the risk never even happens. Sometimes you can start working to mitigate it as it's happening, and this is critical, because otherwise you're going to be not needed, but neck deep into issues that you're always trying to debug and tackle, as opposed to being a leader that's actually able of looking at other things and not just putting out fires day after day. So what are the 3 things that I recommend you start doing in order to improve it on this and face your fears? First, I'll state these are 3 relatively simple things. It doesn't mean that they're easy and you have to start with something. But I've done these with a lot of clients, and when we do it, it often helps almost immediately by starting to eliminate a lot of things that they just have, like, their cognitive load is a bunch of fears that they just keep trying to shove down and ignore till eventually something blows up. Number 1 is not doing this alone. It's so hard sometimes to break out of the fear loop of talking to ourselves about something that might go wrong. And if you get some help, it can really make it so much easier. Sometimes just voicing your concerns in front of someone else can help you realize that, yeah, what you're feeling doesn't even make a lot of sense, but in our minds, it sounds so different. So work on your support system. Of course, the easiest is grab a coach. Find a coach that can help you move much faster, address those fears, and learn from whatever issues you're having as fast as you can do. My email's in the video description if you need one. But it doesn't have to be a coach. It can be a colleague within the company that you trust. It can be a friend that you used to work with, someone from a different company where you're essentially at the same stages. It can be finding some mastermind group with a bunch of people, not too much, but a handful of people where you can all share together, learn together. You can find your own support system. I think I have a video about setting up a support system, and if so, I'll link to it somewhere on screen. But the bottom line is, don't try to do it alone, because there's just this effect that when we talk about our fears with someone else, once we get through actually verbalizing it, especially with someone that's usually not our boss, not directly related to the matter, when we can do that, then we sort of shine a light on the fear itself, and we help it minimize back to where it actually needs to be, to its real life scale. Not the dreadful thing that you have in your mind, but noticing it's, yeah, okay, this might happen, that might happen, but I'm probably not going to get fired for saying I feel like I need help, that sort of stuff. So that's number one. Face your fear with someone else. Get help so you can actually start talking about it and start handling it for real, not just having it loop in your mind. Number two, work on it in iterations. What I love so much about working in iterations with tech, with software, is that I don't have to commit to anything too large. I don't have to pretend I have all the answers. I notice an issue, I will work on what I think is the best way to addressing some of that issue right now so we can make progress and then reassess, and thus we're going to repeat it ad infinitum, finding what we need to tackle and working on it, problem after problem. What works with tech actually can also work in this case. You don't have to have all the answers. If you fear something, it doesn't mean that to address it, you have to already come equipped with a solution. It means that you need to find a way to work on it in iterations with whoever is relevant. If we're talking about that manager that you feel like might be having issues, create an iteration for them to talk about their coaching goals, talk about what they're expecting, talk about what they need to do. Give them a goal, something to focus on for the next month or two, so you can work on it together and help them get better. This attention sometimes is all that's needed. I've got a full video about the impact coaching framework that I'll link to here, because I think that this is essential in order to get started. You create this iteration of personal growth and start gaining momentum, start putting things back on track. This also has to come hand in hand with learning how to verbalize what you're seeing in a way that's not offensive, mostly around facts of what you're noticing, or realizing how to say the things that are not objective, your subjective opinions, in a way that's least offensive and allows them room to communicate with you. So if you sense that something is wrong, if you sense that the CEO doesn't trust you completely, work on how you verbalize that issue and talk about it in a way that brings them into the fold and allows you together to come up with the next iteration of what can we do differently. Maybe I'm going to ask you to give me feedback once every 2 weeks, something that doesn't happen with a lot of CEOs. I don't know. Let's find those things and start moving with those. And also, when you're looking at these things and how you're making progress, you also want to ensure that when you're talking about your own personal issues, you set up something to work on. So you can, if this is about, am I even having enough fun at work? Do I even enjoy this role? You don't have to go to your CEO and say, hey, heads up, I might not enjoy this at all, at least not as a first step, but face the fear. Admit it between you and yourself and do an iteration, trying to see what you actually enjoy, what you want to change in your day-to-day work, what you want to be focusing on differently, and do this with your support system, with your colleague, with your mastermind group, with your coach, so you can start working on that. Once you start having these iterations, you're essentially building momentum. Something will improve. Most of the times, this is all that it takes in order to break free from the fear loop and build a loop of self-improvement. And you might end up realizing anyway that, yeah, after a couple of these iterations, I actually really don't like this company anymore. That's fine. I'd rather you come to that conclusion proactively than be forced to make a decision after some breakdown or after the CEO has had it. Be the person in charge. You owe it to yourself. And lastly, come to grips with the fact that people problems don't auto-heal. You have to work on it. I mentioned it earlier. This is step number 3 because it's critical. Whenever you notice something, you cannot tell yourself that, I can file it away, I can ignore it. You have to become this person that's proactively putting things on the calendar. You notice that there's an issue, don't tell yourself, I don't have even the energy to think about it. Put it on your task list, put it in a notebook. I always have a notebook in my back pocket to write down things that pop up in my head, and I ensure that I add a date to it. When I review my notebook once a week or twice a week, I add dates to everything that I need to tackle, so it moves on to an actual task system, or I decide it's just not worth it. But I don't let anything keep looping. I don't let any fears, any nagging issues just stay there dormant without me tackling them. If I think, I actually need to tackle that before Q1 or with that potential client or with that issue, whatever, I'm going to put a date on it. I'm going to ensure that I'm going to be the one taking the lead. This is extreme ownership when it comes to not letting fears win. And if you do that, you just might end up creating a team worth leading. That's what we started with. And this is, again, for me, my fear. Realizing that we've spent years of our time working with teams that weren't actually we wasted years and we're not going to get back working with teams that no one actually learned too much. We didn't reach anything substantial. It wasn't actually all that fun. We're so lucky and privileged to be able to create these careers where we can work on things that are substantial, on things that actually make us feel good about ourselves and not just be driven by money and needing the next paycheck. It's a sin not to leverage that ability and ensure that you're creating a team that you're energized to work with, that keeps improving. This is my spiel. I'm sorry. This is why I do what I do. And I hope that I just helped you a tiny bit, push you towards facing your fears and being the leader your team deserves and the leader you deserve to be. That's it. If you like this, do like and subscribe. If you have any comments, if you think I said something stupid, if you disagree, if maybe you went through something similar, let me know in the comments. I read everything. I reply to everyone. And I'll see you here in the next video. Ciao.